Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are now in By Blue Ontario's Shore, this amazing poem of some 20 sections, and we're now working with sections 14, 15, and 16. And the code of inclusivity, as I have decided to call it, I think it's a fair question to ask after you finish with passage 13. What could be more radical than what we've already read? And I would challenge you to say, no, there's way more coming. Now, our assumptions are that you have been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt, we are calling our playlist for reasons we made explicit in earlier conversations, obviously. We've given every word of Leaves of Grass its due diligence, from the very opening invitational word of come, all the way up to and including a set of introductory comments to Ontario. And finally, we've already worked passages 1 through 13. Now, our Nortons will tell us that as we begin with passage 14, that these lines and several others that are a part of 14 originated in the 1855 preface. And we've been pointing out that if you go back and read the 1855 preface, which is not a part of the final deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, so many of the classic lines from that preface will now end up in especially passage 14 here. Notice we'll begin with the idea of following leadership. Fall behind me states, notice exclamation point, a man before all, notice the dash, myself, typical before all. Do you remember the opening lines of Song of Myself? Let's just go back and look at those lines just for a second, just to remind ourselves as we pick up Song of Myself, passage 1, the opening lines, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume, you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you. Here we are, back to those ideas again. In other words, I am going to be symbolic, representative of all of you, he will say as the poet. And then he'll say it, give me the pay I have served for. Now, this is ironic, given that poor Whitman never actually received half of the money and the pay that he was worth during his lifetime. Unfortunately, he always kind of lived very meagerly in terms of his economics, right up until the end of his life with his poor health. Give me to sing the songs of the great idea. And of course, we've seen this already several times mentioned, 5 times in this poem, great idea. Take all the rest. In other words, I only want the essentials. I think there's a lot to be said for passages 14, 15, and 16 of Ontario being drawn from our reading and study of Thoreau's Walden. We'll have more to say about that here in a bit. And then he'll say it. This is what he's done. And of course, in the preface, he'll say these lines. I've loved the earth, sun, animals. We think of Song of Myself, passage 32. I've despised riches, taking him back, of course, to the great Socratic tradition. I have given alms to everyone that asked, stood up for the stupid and crazy. The first use of stupid in He Who Learns My Lesson Complete. Crazy only gets used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. Devoted my income and labor to others. I think there's a strong reason why, for example, a country like China that would exclude in its Cultural Revolution all outside Western poets. The only poet they would accept would be Whitman and Leaves of Grass, and it will be lines like this that could be celebrated. Notice, hated tyrants, which is the irony, of course, that Leaves of Grass would be read in China during the Cultural Revolution. Hated tyrants, argued not concerning God. We've, of course, heard this already echoed several times in Leaves of Grass. Had patience and indulgence toward the people. In other words, always trying to understand others. Taken off my hat to nothing known or unknown. You'll remember that in the original 1855 from Song of Myself that then became later passage 20, I cock my hat as I please indoors or out. You'll remember that it was I wear my hat after the change. We've talked about it already. Notice he says, gone freely with powerful, uneducated persons and with the young and with the mothers of families. In other words, I've tried to be the poet of everyone. He says it, read these leaves to myself in the open air. Obviously, we think of Song of Myself, passage 4, that all heroic deeds were done in the open air. tried them by trees, stars, rivers. I love it that it's trees and rivers, but then in between it's stars. It's a wonderful collection of those three words. Dismissed whatever insulted my own soul or defiled my body. Claimed nothing to myself, which I have not carefully claimed for others on the same terms. Here's the inclusivity. In other words, everyone should be allowed to have the greatest amount of freedom. He says, I want to celebrate it for everybody, not for a privileged few. Sped to the camps and comrades, and now we're back, of course, to the war. Found and accepted from every state. And it is true that Whitman, as we said when we were doing drum taps, he spent time with soldiers from both the North and the South, and by all accord treated them as equals. And then in parentheses, just to remind us of what we read in drum taps. Upon this breast has many a dying soldier leaned to breathe his last. We obviously even saw that, Cameretto in the lap, in all of those poems from drum taps that played this game. This arm, we think obviously of, oh Captain, my Captain. This hand, this voice, have nourished, raised, restored to life, recalling many a prostrate form. This idea of restoring to life and resurrection of life we talked about when we did Lilacs. He says it this way, I am willing to wait, the only time that phrase gets used in all of Leaves of Grass. That is to say, patience, remember Longfellow's Psalm of Life, let us then be up and doing with a heart for any faith, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. I think this idea of patience or waiting is central to reading Leaves of Grass. I am willing to wait to be understood by the growth of the taste of myself. There are few lines that are as amazing as that line. Think about a collection of poems called Leaves of Grass. And he says, I'm willing to wait to be understood by the growth of the taste of myself. And, you know, it's he who touches this touches a man, this idea that when you are, in fact, holding Leaves of Grass in your hand, you somehow are holding Whitman himself, and he'll play this game with us here in a second again. Rejecting none, permitting all, again, back to the inclusivity. Say, O mother, and we've seen this use of mother, have I not to your thought been faithful? Have I not through life kept you and yours before me? In other words, I've given everything. And ultimately, Whitman did give his health to being that nurse in the Civil War, many have argued. And then on to passage 15, with the series of I swear, I swear, I swear. We're going to hear this in 15 and 16 now. I swear, he says, I begin to see the meaning of these things. In other words, theodicy, as we've said, a sustained theodicy. Can you explain pain, suffering? Can you give me meaning to the suffering, for example, of the war? Well, obviously, we've said already in earlier lectures that that's exactly what Lincoln was trying to do in the Gettysburg Address. Now we're playing the same game again. I swear I begin to see the meaning of these things. It is not the earth, it is not America who is so great. It is I who am great, or to be great. It is you up there. Now, this takes us back to, as I ebbed with the Ocean of Life 4, when he uses that construction as well as the wound dresser. When he speaks directly to you holding this collection of poems, it's quite a remarkable thing. You up there or anyone. It's to walk rapidly through civilizations. I'm interested in the word rapidly, that adverb. Rapidly through civilizations, governments, theories, through poems, pageants, shows, to form individuals. In other words, again, back to the argument that he's made from the very first lines of Leaves of Grass. Everything that's happened in history has happened to produce this thing called America. And namely, you as an American. Or, later, of course, with Passage to India, it will be all inhabitants of the planet. And then he'll go to this word underneath, which will take us, obviously, to a gardening theme, to Leaves of Grass, to the dirt, and all of that. And of course, the last lines of Song of Myself in 52. But I want us to think as well about Thoreau's great line, I went to the woods because I went deliberately to front only the essential facts. These essentials are what's underneath everything. And he says it. Underneath all individuals, I swear, nothing is good to me now that ignores individuals. The American compact is altogether with individuals. The only government is that which makes minute of individuals. The whole theory of the universe is directed unerringly to one single individual, namely to you. Now, this is radical language, no question. And of course, philosophically, We're back to Emerson's classic idea. In his essay, Nature, we've talked about this at learnstrong.net and some of the others, like self-reliance essays. And I think that Whitman adopted this notion that when he's talking about you, and he's speaking specifically about the individual, he's obviously talking about something more than just body and mind. He's also talking about spirit. And all of these things combine to make you who you are ontologically. And then in parenthetics again with mother, notice it goes back to passage 14 with mother. Mother, what subtle sense severe, notice all those S's, with the naked sword in your hand, I saw you at last refuse to treat but directly with individuals. In other words, the argument that he's making is that America is this amazing dance between the longing to be an individual and the longing to be a part of the group. It is that dance between, in our big five, psychology, sociology. And America is, for Whitman, the classic exemplar of how one can transcend and include all previous history to somehow allow for a nation of individuals who are themselves democratically conjoined. What is the glue that holds us together? Well, for Whitman in this poem, it's the poet. It's the poet-teacher. It is, of course, the great idea. Speaking of the great idea, nativity is how he'll now speak of it in passage 16. He'll continue with 4 of these underneaths. Underneath all, nativity. This is, again, Thoreau's essential facts. I swear I'll stand by my own nativity, pious or impious, so be it. I swear I'm charmed with nothing except nativity. I love that he uses this word charmed. We've seen it in Leaves of Grass. Men, women, cities, nations are only beautiful from nativity. In other words, back to the origins. In some ways, I think what he's really doing is he's playing around with that ancient traditional idea that, of course, so many of his readers would have understood instinctively as the logos, that which is fundamental. And for him, of course, it's going to be love, it's going to be inclusivity. Underneath all, notice capitalized, is the expression of love, as I just mentioned it, for men and women. And then in parenthetics again, you'll notice we've had a series of these. I swear, I've seen enough of mean and impotent modes of expressing love for men and women. Is he here speaking about the old ways, the old myths, the old religions? It'll be interesting for you to think about that. After this day, he says, I take my own modes of expressing love for men and women in parenthetics. And then he comes back to one more, I swear. I swear I will have each quality of my race in myself. And then he comes back to another parenthetic. Talk as you like. He only suits these states, again that formulation, whose manners favor the audacity and sublime turbulence of the states. By the way, sublime turbulence only gets used one time, or the word turbulence gets used only one time, and here it is. In other words, the war was not a mistake. No. The war did not show our weakness. The war showed our fighting spirit, the willingness to stand up for the things we believe in. And in the end, our resolutions after the war will help us. Finally, he finishes with 2 more of these underneaths. Underneath the lesson of things. And again, we're back to Whitman as teacher, teaching the lessons. Underneath the lessons of things, spirits, notice capitalization of nature, nature, governments, ownerships. I swear, I perceive other lessons. In other words, there's depths to knowledge. And he says there's something underneath all of this, something fundamental, something essential is the way that Thoreau will speak of it. Underneath all to me is myself. Again, taking us back to the opening lines of Song of Myself. To you, yourself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as well belongs to you. The same monotonous old song. Now, monotonous here means consistent. That's what he means by monotonous. In other words, in every generation, it always comes back to the tension between the individual and the society. And he says, I know where I come down on this. The individual has got to be considered most precious, and then society. By the way, did you notice he called it the old song? That is why we say in 303 that the new is the new. The N-E-W is the K-N-E-W. We have this tendency to forget it. By the way, that's why we study things like Leaves of Grass, to be reminded that the new, in fact, really is the new. And all these ideas, all these lessons that we are trying to understand, they've been thought of before. There is nothing new under the sun, is the Ecclesiastes line that, of course, Whitman would know all too well, the old song. Finally, at 2a, what are we going to say about themes, messages here as we're now coming to the end of this amazing poem? Well, I think the essential fact of democracy for Whitman is this dance between the power of the individual versus the power of inclusion in the group, and the way in which all of that is assumed in American history and anything that precedes it. At 2B, I'm blown away by all of the repetitions at this part of the poem. I swear, and underneath, they keep coming back. Again, very much like music and arias in music. At 3A, I've mentioned Thoreau's Walden of 1854, but now I want to as well mention that great classic of utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. Notice 1859. So think about your dates here, right? So you've got 1854 Walden, 1855, the very first publishing of Leaves of Grass, and then 1859, you've got On Liberty. What an amazing time. And I hold a lot of this at the feet of Emerson. I think Emerson is the genesis of so much of this. And we've given full lectures at LearnStrong.net on all of those Emerson lectures, Emerson essays for that reason. Finally, at 3B, how are we going to own this section of the poem, Ontario, Blue Ontario Shore? I think one question to ask is, what are the essential facts? Like, what is the most elemental? What is underneath it all? What is it for you? And is it translinguistic, or is there language that you can give to it? Is it in fact something like logos? Is it something like teleos and purpose? Is it love? I mean, what is it for you? And finally, how do you balance this tension between the individual and society? And is your study of Leaves of Grass helping you to do that? Well, come on back and we'll finish this precious poem. Thank you.